Hey everybody, it's Retro DM Ray. I apologize for the first upload. So this is going to be part 2 of that article from Gary in Best of Dragon Volume 2, what the game is and where it's going, from February of 79, number 22. I'm going to go back just a sentence or so and continue on from where I was in the other one. I apologize about that recording there. I don't really have a way to splice these together, so I'm just going to have this as part 2. He goes on to say, if nothing else, the desire to believe in such seems to be innate in humanity. Whether or not there are parallel worlds or places where fantastic creatures actually live and magic works is not germane, for most of us are familiar with the concept as if they were actual, and we have a desire to become involved, if only vicariously, amongst such heroic epics of magic and monsters. It is therefore scarcely surprising that a game which directly involves participants in a make-believe world of just such a nature should prove popular. And had I reasoned out the enthusiasm it roused amongst the first few who played it, it would have been evident that the D&D game was destined to become very popular indeed. Naturally, hindsight is usually a 20/20 proposition, and the fact is, the game was originally written for a small audience of devoted miniatures players. If millions take to the fantasy world of J.R.R. Tolkien, and nearly as many follow the heroic feats of Conan, the market potential of a game system which provides participants with a pastime which creates play resembling these adventuresome worlds and their inhabitants is bound only by its accessibility. Access has two prominent aspects. Availability is the first, that is, are potential players informed of the fact that the game exists, and are they able to physically obtain it? Difficulty is the second, for if once obtained, the game is so abstruse as to be playable only by persons with intelligence far above the norm, or if the game demands a volume of preliminary work which is prohibitive for the normal individual, this will be recognized, and the offering will be shunned even if it is available. The D&D system failed on both accounts, and still its following grew. Today we are putting the D&D game onto the track where it is envisioned it will have both maximum availability and minimum difficulty. This is best illustrated in the D&D Basics set. Well over 2 years ago, we recognized that there was a need for an introductory form of the game. In 1977, the colorfully boxed Basics set was published. It contained simplified, more clearly written rules, dungeon geomorphs, selections of monsters and treasures to place in these dungeons, and a set of polyhedra dice. In short, all that a group of beginning players need to start play with relative ease. Later editions have cleaned up most of the flaws in the first, and the newest will do away with the geomorphs and the list of monsters and treasures in favor of a complete basic module, so that difficulty will be reduced even further. This should broaden the game's appeal to a base in the millions, and then the major factor becomes availability. Popular demand always increases availability, and the D&D game has been blessed by its enthusiasts, most generally in this regard. Coupled with the work being done by TSR to publicize and promote the game, the availability factor will also be maximized over the next few years. Finally, to maintain interest, a series of new and interesting modular dungeon and outdoor scenarios, as well as more playing aids, will be made available periodically. The number of D&D players should certainly continue to mushroom for several years. Fanatical game hobbyists often express the opinion that the Dungeons & Dragons game system will be ever expanding, always improving, as one. TSR and I see it a bit differently. Currently, the D&D concept is moving in two directions. There's the original game system and the new advanced D&D system. New participants can move from the basic set into either form without undue difficulty, especially as playing aid offerings become more numerous, and that is in process now. Americans have somehow come to equate change with improvement. Somehow the school of continuing evolution has conceived that the D&D system can go on in a state of flux, either new version, new and improved. From a standpoint of sales, I beam broadly at the very thought of an unending string of new, improved, super energized versions of the game being hyped to loyal followers of the gaming hobby in general and role-playing fantasy games in particular. As a game designer, I do not agree, particularly as a gamer who began with chess. The original could benefit from a careful reorganization and expansion to clarify things, and this might be done at some future time. As all of the AD&D system is not written yet, it is a bit early for prognostication, but I envision only minor expansions and some rules amending on a gradual addition-to-addition basis. When you have a fine product, it is time to let well enough alone. I do not believe that hobbyists and casual players should be continually barraged with new rules, new systems, and new drains on their purses. Certainly there will be changes, for the game is not perfect, but I do not believe the game is so imperfect as to require constant improvement. Does this mean the game will be at a dead end when the last of the AD&D books is published? Hardly. Modules and similar material will continue to be released so as to make the DM's task easier and his or her campaign better. Quite frankly, the appeal of the D&D game rests principally upon the broad shoulders of the hard-working dungeon masters. The rules never need improvement if the DM is doing a proper job, but of course he or she can do so only if the rules are sufficient to allow this. With refined rules and modular additions, all aspects of a long-lived and exciting campaign will unquestionably be there for the DM to employ. Will the D&D system dead end when its novelty dies? That is impossible to answer. It is my personal opinion that the game form is a classic, which is of the same stamp as chess and Monopoly. Time will be the judge. No doubt there is a limit to the appeal of the game in any of its current forms, if tens of millions play a relatively simple social sort of game such as Monopoly. It is a sure thing, a far more difficult activity such as the D&D game will have a much more limited audience. Since the game cannot be simplified beyond a certain point, we look to another means of popularizing it. A D&D game can be played on a computer. Computers are most certainly a big aspect of the near future, particularly the home computer. Non-programmable computer games are already making big inroads in the toy and hobby market. They will grow still more, and soon programmable games will join this trend. D&D program cassettes plugged into a home computer would obviate the need for a DM or other players. The labor of setting up a campaign or the necessity of having a fairly large group to play it in would be removed. Graphic display would be exciting, and the computer would slave away doing the record work and mechanics necessary to the game, giving nearly instantaneous results to the player or players. Computerization has other benefits. Such games would not destroy the human-run campaign, but would supplement game participation. All that being so, the reader may justifiably inquire as to the purpose of this column. Well, since I make no claim to perfection, no such claim can be made for the AD&D or D&D games. This column will cover controversial rules or systems, problem and so-called problem areas, and consider new material as well. If the games are not to be continually changing and evolving, neither is it envisioned that they have reached such a state of perfection so as to become immutable. What appears herein is discussion that will sometimes lead to alteration, amendment, or expansion of one or the other system. Initially, what you read here will be direct from me, but all DMs and players also are invited to submit articles of high caliber. A glance at the introductory sections of all the works comprising the D&D and AD&D systems shows many individuals contributed to the designs. The list in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide is longer still. All individuals and the audience at large are cordially invited to submit their thoughts and opinions on pertinent matters. If I am not to be the quote-unquote great god Gygax, a claim I never made nor supported, there must be input which presents argumentation and systems which are meaningful alternatives to replace or augment existing rules and systems. This is not to say that anyone's favorite variant, even if well designed, is likely to become a D&D or AD&D product, but at worst, reasons for why it is unacceptable will be given, and the possible results could be a major change in the game. So, here is your forum. All right, so I hope you've liked these two parts of this long read here. I really love how he is talking about that it is two different games. There's the basic game for an introductory beginning level of play that it is anticipated that you will then step into the new advanced D&D system, but they are two separate things. One is the beginning, and the AD&D is the continuation of such. I really like that idea. And I like the fact that he is always talking about the hardworking dungeon masters that are out there, and that the game itself has plenty enough organization and rules and rule systems in place so that way you can actually use all of those things to then run the game that you're going to run. Because like he said, he never made nor supported the claim that he was the great god Gygax. So that absolute rock bed foundation of running things raw, rules as written, Gary never did that from everything I've read and everything I've seen and watched. And so that's not for us to do that either. If you do that in your game, that's great, that's fine. If you like all that, extra work and heavy duty crunch of that, but it's always been something that I've enjoyed, that we just house rule the living crap out of the thing. Okay, so I've got a 2E game that I'm running with my family, for example, and I use stuff from 1E. I'll even use stuff from Basic or BX and throw it in there. I'll use stuff from Basic Fantasy and throw it in there. It's a hodgepodge of a great house ruled game, and man, there was just a ton of games being run back in the 80s that were exactly the same way, all the way through the 80s into the 90s. I put on some college conventions that I supervise at my university. I've been to Gen Con. I've been to some other more local cons back in my home state. I've even sat at the table and played with Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. I'm telling you, everything was house ruled like crazy. All those things were a great privilege. I wasn't around anybody that ran it like absolute foundationally by raw. When he or she DM'd us in those events and in those games. So again, it's your thing. You do what you want to do with it. But I just find it interesting the way Gary is talking about these things in this article and the impetus of how it started out with those hand assembled and hand labeled 1,000 boxed sets of the little brown books, to then now look at it today, multi-million-dollar Dungeons and Dragons. It's just absolutely amazing to me. I don't play 5th edition, don't care for that at all. Never did like that Wizards of the Coast purchased them way back in the end of 2nd edition and that kind of a thing. But that's not my thing. It could be your thing. That's cool. One thing you can say, regardless of what has happened, D&D is around. It's even more popular than ever. I think playing Dungeons and Dragons is very mentally and socially helpful for people and for kids as well. So just all in all, I hope you've enjoyed the look at these articles and the hearing from Gary and these kinds of things. I'm going to continue to share some more of this out of these Best of Dragons. And I'll pick out some other Dragon Magazine articles, and maybe we'll just kind of look at different key sections in there and cover some stuff from them. I'm getting some good positive feedback on these videos, so keep giving me that thumbs up and that subscribe and that share. Put some stuff in the comments saying, hey, we really like these Dragon coverages. Do some more of that kind of stuff. I'll be glad to do that. Look for another old school spell coming up here soon. My Forbidden Lands is kind of on a temporary hiatus, so I'll get back to that here soon, covering some more of that. And then maybe later on in the year, I'll get around to some One Ring 2nd edition stuff for Free League as well, because they've just been fantastic to me. So hope you guys are having some great games. Continue to have those awesome games. And as Gary said at the end of one of his articles, hey, prosper and enjoy your games. All right, take care, everybody. Later.